guys, so this is going to tie into something that I'm going to be releasing in a tech blog next week, but even just getting this first part of it was enough of a challenge that I thought it warranted a tech blog in and of itself. And this particular move is triquetra versus pendulum, but performed with only one hand. And as you can see, it looks kind of wonky. I still don't have it perfected, but I can at least repeat it with reasonable frequency. And it's an absolute pain in the ass to get down, and here's why. You're essentially controlling the plane of two different poi, one of which is in pendulum, with the same hand, right? Which means that your index and thumb are doing a slightly different operation than your pinky and ring finger, which is kind of a pain, right? Here's how I worked up to it, basically. As I'm performing it, my two poi are actually in slightly different planes. You could consider this to be a type of atomic. And part of the challenge here is that I'm always shooting to aim one of my planes just above the plane of the other poi. And sometimes it doesn't work out, but those times that it does, I think it looks really cool. Here's how I got there. Essentially, the blue poi right here is going to be in pendulum, but the red poi is going to be rotating the entire time. That means I got to get used to having my red poi here spinning while my blue poi doesn't, which is much harder than you might think, especially because these 90s take up a lot of room. It might be easier with sock poi, but I didn't have sock poi to work with. How I got into this was I actually started off by having this orange poi rotate around in a horizontal plane above the blue poi. And the exercise here was to keep that blue poi as still as possible, which is actually a much bigger challenge than you think it's going to be. As you can even see right there, it's wiggling around quite a bit, but not as much if, say, I switch to more diagonal plane. In this particular case, you're going to notice the wobble is going to get much, much more pronounced, and the likelihood that that orange poi is going to hit the blue poi increases exponentially. And ironically enough, the thing I have to do to correct the plane on my orange poi, because it starts tilting off to the side, is exactly the thing that starts making the blue poi tilt forward and back with much greater pitch, right? So then the challenge winds up being, how long can I keep my orange poi in a more or less vertical plane without getting my blue poi to move around at all? And I really, really, really have to get my index and thumb deeply engaged in order to keep this movement going. What you'll probably find when you start off is it starts off well enough, and then that blue poi starts moving more and more, and they tangle up between each other, right? I'm finding I'm having to hold the red poi out just a little bit, pinched between those two fingers. I keep going back and forth between referring to it as the orange poi and the red poi. That's my fault, I'm sorry. And the challenge is to try and get that orange poi plane as vertical as possible without running into the blue poi. Meanwhile, with the blue poi, my job is to try and minimize its movement so that it doesn't get tangled up, right? Now, I considered that to be successful when I could do it, say, like, 10 times, 10 beats with my orange poi and not hitting my blue poi, right? So then it was time to actually move on to the move itself. Now, trying to do the timing that I'm used to for this move doesn't work at all. They run into each other very, very quickly. So in order to avoid that happening, what had to happen was going from this pendulum right here, I would begin turning, and then I would actually cut the pendulum for my blue poi just a little bit short, and that usually gave me enough time to get my orange poi where it needed to be. So this actually feels a lot less like the really pretty triquetra versus pendulum that I'm used to using in wall plane, and it feels much more like the one that most of us learned on, where you don't get that nice tabletop feeling on either side, but you get more of diagonal lines on either side, and the range of movement is much smaller. There's also kind of a moment where, as I'm going around, ugh, it's such a pain in the ass to get into too. As I'm going around, I'm almost like catching that blue poi for a second and trying to prevent it from going any further up. And that's what gives me the window to get the orange poi around it. Like so. The catch is right there. Right there. Right there. And that's what gives me the moment to get that orange poi around. This is a pain in the butt. I've been working on this all day, and it's still not terribly clean. So, if any of y'all out there are interested in taking on this challenge, my hat's off to you, and it'll tie into something really cool next week. So, thank you for watching, and have a good week. Peace.